Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really immersing ourselves in the life of Michael Hutchence. I mean, a man whose presence just completely defined the look, the sound of global rock music in the late 20th century. He was, of course, the captivating co-founder, lead singer, and lyricist of INXS.
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically impossible to talk about modern Australian music without recognizing INXS. Between 1977 and 1997, they were just huge, massive global hits, selling, over 50 million records?
Incredible numbers.
And Hutchence, with that incredible blend of raw sexuality and real artistic depth, he was undeniably the face of all that success.
And when you look at the source material we've got here, it's pretty comprehensive, biographies, documentaries, critical reviews. It really tells a story that goes way beyond the tabloid headlines. For so many people, the name Michael Hutchence just instantly brings up the sensational tragedy of his death. He was only 37.
Right. And that's exactly what we want to cut through today. Our mission here is to understand the whole complex trajectory of his life. We're focusing on, I think, three main things. The sheer power of his artistic output, that intense public versus private life he had to navigate, and maybe most crucially, the life-altering circumstances, especially a profound physical injury, that really give context to that tragic end.
So for you, the learner, this deep dive is designed to be, well, a thorough but quick way to get under the surface. We're moving past the basics to deliver some real insight into how that intense fame intersects with personal vulnerability, physical trauma, and, mental health challenges. It's about understanding the man behind the microphone.
Exactly. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's unpack the beginnings. Michael Hutchence, born 1960, Crow's Nest, Sydney. Not exactly born into rock and roll royalty, right?
Yeah.
His mother, Patricia Glassop, was a makeup artist, and his father, Kellen Frank Hutchence, a businessman.
Yeah, and the really defining thing about his earliest years was constant movement, which is, pretty unusual for someone who becomes a rock star. The family moved to Brisbane shortly after he was born, and then, and this is key, they left Australia altogether for Hong Kong. That's a massive cultural shift for a young Australian kid.
Hong Kong does seem really pivotal for his creative side. Her sources mention he went to Glen Early Junior School and Beacon Hill School there. And apparently he was quite the swimmer initially. Looked promising.
He was, yeah, until a really bad arm break, a serious one.
Ah.
And that injury basically slammed the door on any kind of professional swimming ropes. The sources really highlight this moment. It's when he pivoted, towards the performing arts, started focusing on poetry, and then later singing.
Interesting transition.
And the first recorded performance we know about is actually him singing a song for a local toy store commercial in Hong Kong. Pretty humble beginnings.
Yeah. Charming even. But that shift from physical discipline to creative expression, it sort of sets the stage, doesn't it?
It really does. The family came back to Sydney in 1972, settled in Belrose. And this is the crucial part for INXS. He meets Andrew Ferris at Davidson High School.
Right, the Ferris connection. That's the bedrock, isn't it?
Absolutely. Michael and Andrew hit it off straight away, became good friends. And soon, Michael's hanging out, jamming with Andrew and his brothers, Tim and John, in the family garage. So you've got the singer and the main songwriter connecting really early on.
They weren't exactly INXS straight out of the gate, though. Their first band, Dr. Dolphin.
Dr. Dolphin, yeah. Sounds like a school band name, doesn't it? Not exactly stadium rock.
Not quite.
But it shows those genuine roots, that collaborative spirit. Dr. Dolphin eventually broke up, but the core guys knew they had something. So by 1977, the six-piece lineup that would become INXS was basically set. You had Andrew on keys, Tim on lead guitar, John on drums, Hutchence singing, Gary Beers on bass, and Kirk Pengilly on guitar and sax.
And they started out as the Ferris Brothers.
Initially, yeah. The sources even pinpoint their debut gig, August 16th, 1977, at a place in Whale Beach. Which is kind of fascinating timing, right? Just days after Elvis Presley died. Maybe a symbolic changing of the guard for rock frontmen.
Wow, yeah. And they jumped straight into that tough Australian pub rock scene.
Oh, yeah. And for anyone who doesn't know, that circuit was brutal. Tiny, smoky venues playing multiple sets a night, often opening for really established hard-rocking bands like Midnight Oil. That environment, it forces you to develop stage presence, stamina, a certain swagger.
Yeah,
fast.
you had to earn your stripes.
Definitely. And they clearly solidified their identity pretty quickly. By 1979, they'd changed the name to INXS, pronounced in excess, of course. Started playing into that name September 1st, 79.
And the debut album, INXS, came out in 1980. Gave them their first Aussie Top 40 hit, Just Keep Walking.
And right from the start, it was clear it was a creative partnership. Hutchence co-wrote almost everything with Andrew Ferris. Plus, Michael immediately emerged as the band's main spokesperson. He just had that look, the voice, the charisma. The media loved him.
What's really interesting, though, even this early, before they were massive globally, is that he already wanted to do other things. The sources point out that pretty soon after their second INXS album, Underneath the Colors, he recorded his first solo single. That was 1982.
Yes, Speed Kills. It was written by Don Walker from Cold Chisel, another legendary Aussie band, and it was for the soundtrack of a film called Freedom. Think about that collaboration for a sec. Walker's known for a much grittier, very Australian rock sound compared to where INXS was heading, more polished pop funk.
Right. Different vibe entirely.
It's early proof that Hutchence wanted to stretch himself artistically, Go beyond just the band's sound. That's a theme we'll definitely see again when they're at the peak of their fame.
He wasn't content to just stay in one lane. It signals that kind of artistic restlessness that led to some really interesting side projects later on.
Absolutely. So as we move into the mid-'80s, this is where things really start to accelerate. They go from being big in Australia to getting serious international attention, especially with the album The Swing in 1984.
And the awards started coming in back home, too. The sources have mentioned the 1984 Countdown Music and Video Awards, sort of like the Aussie Grammys back then. Hutchence won Most Popular Male Performer, and he and Andrew Ferris won Best Songwriter. They were the biggest thing in the country.
And their whole presentation at that awards show was really interesting. They performed Burn For You, dressed in akubras and drizzabones.
Ah, the classic Aussie gear.
Exactly. For listeners outside Australia, the akubra is that wide-brimmed hat, very outback, and the drizzabone is the heavy oilskin coat. By wearing that stuff, they were making a deliberate statement, projecting this rugged, authentic Australian identity, which really contrasted with all the slick synth pop dominating the charts elsewhere.
It was a smart branding move, connecting them to their roots, even as they were clearly aiming for global success. And around the same time, Hutchence started exploring acting more seriously.
Right. In 1986, he starred as Sam in this Australian film Dogs in Space. It was directed by Richard Lowenstein, who'd already done several INXS music videos, so there was a connection there. Hutchence even contributed 4 songs to the soundtrack, kind of blending his music and film interests.
And that success at home led straight into the Australian-made tour in 86-87. That was a massive national tour, INXS headlining with other huge Aussie acts like Jimmy Barnes.
Yeah, and that tour led to that famous collaboration with Barnes on the Easy Beats cover, Good Times.
Oh yeah, great track.
It was huge in Australia, hit number 2. But importantly, it got featured really prominently on the soundtrack for the Lost Boys movie in the U.S.
Right, I remember that.
Even though the song itself only got to number 47 on the U.S. charts, that exposure was crucial. It introduced INXS and Hutchence's voice to that massive American youth market right before their biggest album ever dropped.
Which brings us to 1987 and Kick. This wasn't just success, this was global saturation.
Kick was just a phenomenon. Musically, it was this perfect fusion of rock, funk, pop. Commercially, it was a powerhouse. Number 1 in Australia, number 3 on the U.S. Billboard 200. It went 6 times platinum in the States.
Driven by that unbelievable run of hits. 4 U.S. top 10 singles from one album, New Sensation, Never Tear Us Apart, Devil Inside, and of course, the number 1, Need You Tonight.
Yeah, staggering success.
Let's talk about Need You Tonight for a second. It's still probably their most iconic song, right?
Yeah.
And so much of that is down to Hutchence's delivery. The sources have some really interesting analysis on why that song connected so powerfully.
They do. The critics noted that the lyrics themselves are actually pretty simple, almost deliberately basic expressions of desire, nothing too complex there.
Right.
But the magic was all in the performance. One analysis described his vocal as starting like a kittenish whisper, then kind of pulling back before returning with the incredible lust of a tiger hunting in the night.
Wow, evocative description.
Yeah, and the critic wrapped it up by saying the song was as sexy and funky as any white rock group has ever been. It just transcended genre because of Hutchence's sheer charisma.
And that combo, the sound and the visuals, they were made for MTV. The Need You Tonight immediate video was groundbreaking. It just swept the 1988 MTV Video Music Awards, won 5 awards. That really cemented Hutchence as the visual frontman of that whole era.
Absolutely. But even then, even at the absolute peak of INXS mania, Hutchence still had that artistic itch, He needed an outlet beyond the band's sound. And that's where the Max Q project comes in.
Max Q, right. 1989. That was a collaboration with Ollie Olsen, an Australian experimental musician. What was the idea behind that? How different was it from INXS?
Hutchence actively wanted to explore, as he put it, the darker side of his music, things that just wouldn't fit into the INXS arena rock mold. The album they made was this really deep dive into electronic and dance music, pushing boundaries. It showed he was really adaptable.
And how was it received?
Critics were pretty impressed. Some called it one of the most innovative dance music albums of the decade. They saw it as a significant statement for Hutchence personally. He was clearly trying to show he had more depth than just being the rock sex symbol.
Yeah, that speaks volumes about his artistic drive, doesn't it? Using the huge INXS platform to do something riskier, more challenging.
Totally. And that need for different outlets went back to film again, too. In 1990, he took on a really specific role, playing the romantic poet Percy Shelley in Roger Corman's film Frankenstein Unbound.
Percy Shelley. That's a long way from Dogs in Space.
Exactly. It felt like an attempt to be seen as a more serious actor, maybe connecting back to that early interest he had in poetry.
Interesting. Meanwhile, back with INXS, they put out the X album in 1990, still delivering huge international hits like Suicide Blonde. Top 10 in the US, number 2 in Australia. And the story behind that title is pure rock and roll anecdote, right? Linking his private life and lyrics.
Oh, yeah. Classic story. Apparently, the phrase came from his girlfriend at the time, pop superstar Kylie Minogue. She used the phrase suicide blonde to describe the look of a platinum blonde wig she wore for her role in the film The Delinquents. Hutchence heard it and just immediately grabbed onto the drama of the phrase for a song title.
Huh. Amazing. And this whole period really cemented his individual status, too. He won Best International Artist at the Brit Awards in 1991. It's a big deal, showing he was seen as this compelling global figure, even outside the band context.
Definitely. And we should talk about his actual instrument, his voice, and his presence. The sources get quite detailed about his vocal range. He was a baritone, but with this incredible span from a low bass B1 all the way up to a high tenor F5.
Wow, that's a huge range.
It is, and it explains that flexibility. We talked about how he could do that soft, seductive purr, but also built out those powerful rock notes when needed, like on Devil Inside or Original Sin.
And he got recognition for it. Ranked 4th in a 2013 list of the greatest Australian singers. Billboard magazine singled out his charisma, mentioning his seductive purr and that live magnetic stage presence.
Yeah, and a writer for Rolling Stone really nailed his stage persona, I thought. Described him as a man born to be on stage, living and loving every minute, an explosion of sexual energy.
That sums it up pretty well.
And biographer Toby Creswell flat out stated Hutchence was, without question, one of the truly great frontmen.
That sentiment seems pretty universal in all the source material. He just sold the whole package.
But as that fame reached, supernova levels, so did the scrutiny. And this is where we start to see that shift from charismatic artist towards, troubled celebrity. The London tabloids jumped on it, didn't they? Giving him that nickname, the Wild Man of Rock.
Yeah, fueled by reports of public brawls and one-time open drug use. That nickname kind of reflected the chaotic public image, maybe one he even cultivated to some extent. But if you look at his personal life, especially earlier on, there was a really important emotional anchor. The sources really highlight Michelle Bennett.
Right, the Australian film producer. They dated from 82 to 87. Yeah, and she was clearly much more than just a girlfriend. Described as his first real love, his closest friend and confidant. They stayed close even after they broke up. And the depth of that relationship is really cemented by the fact that she inspired their huge ballad, Never Tear Us Apart.
Wow, I didn't know that was about her. That's powerful.
And listen to this. Both his sister, Tina Hutchence, and the director, Richard Lowenstein, who knew him well, they both stated emphatically that Michelle Bennett was the only woman Hutchence ever seriously considered marrying.
Wow.
Yeah. That detail really establishes her as this consistent, grounding force in his otherwise pretty tumultuous life.
So after Bennett, his relationships were much more high profile, weren't they? Kylie Minogue, Belinda Carlisle, then Helena Christensen, the supermodel, from 91 to 95.
Right. And it was during the relationship with Helena Christensen that the absolute central tragedy of his life happened, the event that basically rewired everything for his final years.
This is the Copenhagen Assault, August 1992.
Exactly. This is the critical turning point. He and Christensen were out cycling at night in Copenhagen. He apparently got into some kind of confrontation with a taxi driver, refused to move out of the road or something. The sources say the taxi driver then assaulted Hutchence.
Physically assaulted him?
Yeah, punched him or pushed him, causing him to fall backward and just smash his head violently on the pavement. He fractured his skull.
Oh my God. A fractured skull.
Right.
And then he didn't get treatment right away.
That's the catastrophic part. Maybe it was that rock star bravado, shaking it off, but he waited several days before actually seeing a doctor about a fractured skull.
Which must have made things so much worse.
Devastatingly worse. The result was permanent, clinical brain damage. The most immediate effects people noticed were sensory. He almost completely lost a sense of smell and lost a huge amount of his sense of taste. Just imagine how profoundly that impacts your quality of life, your enjoyment of anything.
Awful.
Yeah.
But the sources say the physical symptoms were almost secondary to the psychological changes.
Absolutely. The brain injury triggered severe periods of depression, intense mood swings, and this is key, a drastic, noticeable increase in aggression and problems with impulse control. The charming, witty, sort of easygoing Michael Hutchence, he effectively vanished after that.
And the bandmates saw it firsthand.
They were the first ones to really witness this terrifying change. Gary Beers, the bassist, he recounted this horrifying incident during the recording sessions for the Full Moon, Dirty Hearts album in 1993. Beers said Hutchence actually threatened to kill him with a knife.
With a knife. That's shocking. That's not just rock star antics. That's completely out of character for the guy they'd known for 15 years.
Exactly. And Beers elaborated in the sources, saying that over those 6 weeks of recording, Hutchence threatened or physically confronted nearly every member of the band. Medically, the explanation is clear. Traumatic brain injury, TBI, affecting the frontal lobe. That's where your impulse control, your emotional regulation, all that is managed.
So this wasn't him just leaning into the wild man persona. This is a clinical result of physical damage.
Precisely. It was a clinical manifestation of deep physical trauma. And that injury, it provides the absolutely necessary, though heartbreaking context for his last 5 years. He was fighting this constant invisible battle with an injury that had fundamentally altered his personality, and that was compounded by all the intense pressures of fame, touring, media scrutiny.
So when we talk about his later volatility, the aggression, the darkness, we have to remember the fractured skull.
It's the moment the story shifts, doesn't it? From rock biography to, frankly, medical tragedy. The man the public saw after 1992 wasn't the same man he was before. That volatility, the darkness that ultimately led to his death, it had a physical, clinical root cause.
Right. And that context, the TBI context, is absolutely essential as we move into those final years and the relationship that brought just the most relentless media storm of his life. Paul Yates.
Yeah, the relationship started in 1994. Yates interviewed him for her show, The Big Breakfast. They'd actually met years before, back in '85, but this interview ignited this huge scandal because, of course, Yates was still married to Bob Geldof.
The Bob Geldof, global activist, Boomtown Rats singer. Yeah, that was guaranteed tabloid fodder.
Oh, it was toxic. The media frenzy was just pervasive, nonstop. And the sources note this is the period when Hutchence, maybe fueled by that TBI-related aggression we just talked about, actually assaulted a photographer. Every single aspect of their relationship became front-page news.
And the pressure just ramped up even more after Yates divorced Geldof in 1996, right? Because that kicked off that really bitter, very public custody battle over Geldof's daughters.
Yeah, and Hutchence got completely sucked into that legal drama, which just added this layer of profound stress onto his already fragile mental state.
But amidst all that chaos, they did start a family. Their daughter, Heavenly Hirani Tiger Lily Hutchence, was born in July 1996, apparently at home in their London bathroom with Hutchence helping deliver her.
That's what the sources say. So fast forward to late 1997, INXS is getting ready for the Australian leg of their Elegantly Wasted World Tour. Hutchence flies into Sydney, expecting Paula and the kids, including Tiger Lily, to join him pretty soon. The sources describe him as really looking forward to it, being quite excited about them coming.
But that plan just completely fell apart on the morning of his death, November 22nd, 1997.
Yeah. Yates called Hutchence that morning. She told him that Bob Geldof's lawyers had managed to get the custody hearing adjourned, pushed back until December 17th. And the practical effect of that was that she and the children couldn't leave the UK. They couldn't come to Australia.
Oh, man. Devastating timing for him.
Absolutely devastating. He's physically alone in Sydney, thousands of miles away, and then emotionally just blindsided by this news. And the phone calls he made them his next few hours, They paint a really grim picture of just spiraling despair and that volatility we talked about.
The first call mentioned is to Bob Geldof himself, around 5 a.m. Sydney time.
Right. Geldof later told the police that Hutchence was hectoring and abusive and threatening during that call. And apparently a neighbor in the hotel, the Ritz-Carlton, confirmed hearing a loud male voice and swearing around that time. Given what we know about the TBI-induced aggression, that unfortunately aligns with his post-92 behavior under stress.
He was clearly in crisis. And the last call he made was to Michelle Bennett, his first love, his confidant.
Yeah, at 9:54 a.m., she was the last person to speak to him. Her statement to the authorities was heartbreaking. She said Hutchence was crying, extremely upset, said he couldn't sleep, and that he just urgently needed to see her.
So she went straight over.
She did. Arrived at the Ritz-Carlton in Double Bay at 10:40 a.m., but couldn't get any answer at his door. She said later she assumed, maybe hoped, he'd finally just crash from exhaustion, so she left a note for him at reception.
And then, less than an hour and a half later,
at 11:50 a.m., a hotel maid entered the room and discovered his body.
The police report gave some grim, specific details about the scene, didn't it?
Very grim. Found naked in a kneeling position facing the door. He'd used his snakeskin belt, tied it to the automatic door closer mechanism at the top of the door, and had strained his head forward into the loop so hard that the buckle had broken.
Just awful. And the official finding came a few months later, February 98.
Yes, the New South Wales coroner, Derek Hand, issued the report. The conclusion was unequivocal based on all the forensic evidence. Ruled suicide by hanging, committed while depressed and under the influence of alcohol and other drugs.
And the toxicology report backed that up.
It did. Crucially, it confirmed alcohol, cocaine, Prozac, which he'd been prescribed for depression since late 95, and refilled just 3 weeks before his death, and other prescription drugs were present in his system. The coroner explicitly stated he found zero evidence to support any kind of accidental death.
But there were conflicting statements about whether he'd seemed suicidal, weren't there? Michelle Bennett insisted he never expressed anything like that to her.
Right. But his mother confirmed he had been severely depressed. And this is where Richard Lowenstein's later investigation for the Mystify documentary becomes really vital. He got access to Hutchence's old diaries from the 80s.
And found what?
He found drawings of stick figures with a noose, suggesting these thoughts weren't just a sudden thing at the very end. Plus, Lowenstein dug up about 6 or 7 old interviews where Hutchence had actually talked about suicide, including this chilling line, "No one minds if you kill yourself."
Wow, that adds a whole other layer, which leads us directly to the biggest controversy, the one that the tabloids ran with, the autoerotic asphyxiation theory.
Yeah, Paula Yates herself started that narrative in 1999. She suggested his death might have been accidental, happening during some kind of solo sex act gone wrong. The British tabloids, of course, seized on it immediately. Maybe it felt less bleak than suicide, and the fact he was found unclothed just fueled all that speculation.
But the sources, especially the forensic reviews and people close to him, they strongly refute that, don't they?
Overwhelmingly. Lowenstein, having seen the full, uncensored autopsy report for his documentary, stated there was absolutely zero forensic evidence to support the autoerotic theory. None.
And people who knew him pushed back, too.
Definitely. His sister, Tina, addressed the nakedness aspect head-on. She pointed out in her book that Michael had slept naked habitually since he was a teenager, so finding him unclothed wasn't indicative of anything specific happening right before his death.
Right, it was just how he slept. And Lowenstein made a pretty strong logical argument against the timeline, too.
Yeah, he basically said, look, he's ringing his longtime girlfriend, Michelle Bennett, 20 minutes before his death. You don't ring someone crying, bawling your eyes out, and then go off and have some autoeroticism 20 minutes later when she's banging on the door and you're not alive anymore. It just doesn't add up.
Makes sense.
And Lowenstein also confirmed he specifically asked all of Hutchence's significant former partners, Kylie Minogue, Helena Christensen, others about any interest in bondage or erotic asphyxiation. They all said no, absolutely not. So the weight of evidence firmly points back to the coroner's original finding: suicide by hanging while deeply depressed and heavily impaired. Lowenstein even suggested that the autoerotic rumor might have been deliberately pushed by certain people wanting to hide that he wasn't depressed, maybe for insurance or legal reasons.
Right, the financial implications. Which brings us to the aftermath. A huge public funeral, but then years of disputes over his remains, and even more disturbingly, his money.
Yeah, the funeral itself was massive. St. Andrew's Cathedral in Sydney, November 27, 1997. Over 600 people, family, Paula Yates, Tiger Lily, former partners like Kylie and Helena were there. It was broadcast live across Australia, which really shows the scale of public grief.
And the music was incredibly poignant. Never Tear Us Apart played as the casket was carried out by the band and his brother.
And Nick Cave, a close friend, performed his song Into My Arms. There's a note in the sources that Cave made a really specific request that all the TV cameras be turned off during his performance. He wanted that moment of tribute to be private, respectful, shielded from the media glare.
A powerful gesture. But there was controversy even around the funeral itself.
Yeah, his brother Rhett later claimed in a book that Paula Yates actually placed a gram of heroin into Michael's pocket while he was lying in the coffin at the funeral home.
Wow. Heavy stuff. And then the issue with his ashes.
There was apparently a dispute over his wish to be cremated, but eventually his ashes were divided 3 ways. His father scattered his portion in Sydney Harbor, in Rose Bay, on what would have been Michael's 38th birthday, January 22, 1998.
And INXS. They actually carried on for quite a while, didn't they? Until 2012. Got into the ARA Hall of Fame in 2001. But Hutchence himself left behind some unfinished work.
He did. His solo album, simply titled Michael Hutchence, came out posthumously in 1999. He'd started working on it back in 95, recording tracks here and there between INXS commitments. And the fact that the very last song he recorded, just 3 days before he died, was called Possibilities, it's just crushingly ironic.
Yeah. The album also had that duet, Slide Away, with his close friend Bono from U2.
Right. Their voices are together on the track, but the sources confirm Bono actually recorded his vocals after Michael's death. So the collaboration itself became this poignant, posthumous tribute from one friend to another.
But now we have to get to maybe the most shocking and frankly enduring mystery of his legacy, something that really highlights the brutal realities of celebrity death. The fact that his entire estate basically vanished.
It's a devastating detail the sources bring up repeatedly. Hutchence's estate was widely thought to be worth somewhere between $10 and $20 million. I mean, a huge fortune from decades of global hits, touring, royalties, millions. But by 2005, reports started coming out that the entire estate amounted to virtually nothing, apparently just swallowed up by legal fees, complex tax issues, assets sold off through opaque offshore trusts, just legal maneuvering.
And the most heartbreaking part of that financial story
is his daughter, Tiger Lily. The sources report that she later received an inheritance of just $900.
$900 from an estate worth potentially $20 million.
It's almost unbelievable. A global icon, someone who generated millions upon millions for record labels, publishers, collaborators, leaves his only child with basically nothing.
That financial outcome, it just underlines this pervasive issue with celebrity deaths, doesn't it? How quickly assets can be dismantled or hidden through legal structures, often leaving the intended heirs completely unprotected. The man who lived in excess left almost nothing behind. It's incredibly sad.
It really is. And the 2019 documentary, Mystify, directed by Richard Lowenstein, his friend, that was so important in reshaping how people understood the whole story, especially forcing that re-examination of the cause of death by presenting the clear evidence about the brain injury.
And finally, his impact on his peers, his fellow musicians. That legacy is strong, too. The sources point out several really powerful musical tributes. Duran Duran wrote, "Michael, you've got a lot to answer for," pretty soon after his death in '97, specifically about the turbulence of his life with Paula Yates.
And Bono's tribute with U2, Stuck in a Moment You Can't Get Out Of, from their 2000 album, that's particularly moving. Bono actually structured the song as this imagined argument he wished he'd had with Michael, trying to talk him out of the foolishness of suicide.
He felt guilt about not having that conversation.
Deep guilt, yeah. He admitted he wished he'd had that specific row in real life. And U2 continues to honor him. They paid tribute during their Sydney shows in 2019. So for those who knew him well, the loss is clearly still deeply felt, linked to that sense of maybe preventable tragedy.
And his influence went beyond just his close friends. Terry Nunn from the band Berlin.
Yeah, she said her song Sacred and Profane was directly inspired by seeing Hutchence perform live for the first time. She called him the epitome of a rock star, said his stage presence just changed her life as a performer. It shows his magnetism was really transformative for other artists, too.
And then INXS themselves, their own tribute came in 2006 with the song God's Top 10, written by Andrew Ferris for Michael and for his daughter, Tiger Lily. Even though that original six-piece unit was broken, his memory remained absolutely central to their history.
Enduring legacy, for sure.
So, looking back at the whole arc of Michael Hutchence's life, We start with this incredibly vibrant, restless, ambitious artist who completely conquered the world stage. But the absolute crucial piece of understanding we have to integrate now is that 1992 Copenhagen assault and the traumatic brain injury that resulted from it. That physical trauma, it fundamentally contextualizes the volatility, the aggression, the profound depression that marked his final years and ultimately led to that tragic end in the hotel room in 1997. It really shifts the narrative, doesn't it? Moves it away from just celebrity scandal towards a more clinical, compassionate understanding of a life profoundly derailed by injury.
I agree. The icon, the frontman, he remains one of the truly unforgettable figures in modern music. That ability he had to fuse raw sexual energy with really smart pop sensibility, it defined an era. But the tragedy, I think, lies not just in the lost potential, but in the fact that the actual medical reality of his final years, the direct impact of the TBI, was so often obscured, wasn't it? Obscured by sensational media speculation and then by the legal battles that followed his death.
Yeah, this whole deep dive, it's really detailed. The impact of fame, the trauma, the legal disputes on his life and his reputation. But maybe the most provocative thought this leaves us with, especially considering that final section, has to be that profound financial mystery. That $10 to $20 million fortune that just evaporated, leaving his only daughter with virtually nothing.
And that raises a really important question, I think, for you, the listener, to think about and maybe explore further. What does the story of Michael Hutchence truly tell us about how the media, the legal systems, and that whole sophisticated machinery surrounding global celebrity actually manage the financial estates, and maybe just as importantly, the lasting reputations of these huge stars immediately after they pass away? It's a really sad postscript to his story, but one that speaks volumes about the often brutal business of fame.
A powerful question indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this detailed exploration of the life, the artistry, and the truly tragic final years of Michael Hutchence. We definitely encourage you to explore the source material further to get an even richer understanding of this complex and compelling figure. We really appreciate you taking this deep dive with us today.